Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 346, Social Psychology, and today we're going to be talking about attraction and relationships. So we've talked about all the different ways in which people can interact with each other socially. Now we're finishing off talking about how people form romantic relationships. And when we think about it, if we look at this from an evolutionary perspective, this should be the ultimate goal that we humans have, to procreate, to reproduce. So how are we attracted to people? Well, what is attraction? Attraction are these feelings of positivity, warmth, familiarity that we have with another individual. Attraction can be driven by many different factors, such as we're attracted to people who are similar to us, who are physically close to us, who are more familiar to us, who also like us. And we tend to like people more when we're in anxiety-provoking situations. Anxiousness tends to breed affiliation with other people. But we're primarily attracted to people who are attractive. And being attractive can mean different things to many people. We could focus on what's pleasing to the eyes, what may be considered beautiful. We've talked a little bit about that already. Symmetrical faces tend to be perceived as more attractive. And physical attractiveness is valued by both men and women, but it tends to be valued by men more. What do women value? Well, they tend to value men who are wealthy or have higher status. And this can be, again, driven by a more evolutionary view or evolutionary approach to social psychology. When you think about both men and women have a goal to procreate. This goal is fulfilled differently depending on whether or not you are a man or a woman. For men, procreation is a short-term, low-cost endeavor. As compared to women, it's a very long-term, high-cost endeavor. So men focus more on the quantity of mates, whereas women focus more on the quality of mates. And this in turn determines what is an ideal mate. For men, it's a mate that can pass on good genes, who has good genes, maybe attractive women. For women, it's a man who can provide for offspring, who have a lot of wealth that they can use to help raise a child. This kind of comes to fruition in a number of different ways. For example, men are more likely to spontaneously agree to sex, for example, compared to women. Men have much lower standards for sexual encounters than women do. And we see that in men and women as well, that we tend to be primed for mates that are appropriate for us, that are maybe, for example, genetically superior. So for example, women are able to smell the genetics in t-shirts of men, so they're able to, they find that t-shirts are better smelling when they were worn by men who are genetically better off or genetically superior than other men. And we tend to see that men are more attracted to women when they're ovulating. So if there are these kind of stark differences between men and women in terms of sexual mates, in terms of preferences for mates, we should see this also come to fruition in how people respond to a question such as what qualities or what characteristics do you see in an ideal mate? Well, surprisingly enough, if we look at some cross-cultural data, we don't see a whole lot of differences between men and women in the important things. So both men and women value love, value dependable character, pleasing disposition, etc. So why might this be the case? Well, rather than focusing on an evolutionary perspective, we can instead take a different route and focus on what's known as social role theory. And this kind of focuses on the fact that we're looking for a mate that fulfills the socially defined roles that we are expecting or we are used to. So if we think about, again, we can take a look at our ancestors and think of hunters and gatherers and the roles in society that men and women typically fulfilled. Men might want an ideal woman who fits those roles, such as a woman who is good at taking care of children, maybe can pass on genes, and women also focusing on men who is a breadwinner, who can actually go out and hunt and get food and provide for the family. So these two differences are not far off from what an evolutionary perspective would predict, but it predicts it for very different reasons. And now what happens when we start to form relationships? Well, there are several keys to an ideal relationship. Social penetration theory specifically suggests that self-disclosure is extremely critical to forming a strong relationship. That we need to disclose personal information that is extremely personal and about a wide variety of topics in our life. And once we cover the depth and breadth of personal information, that's when we start to see a strong relationship form. Love can form once we have disclosed enough information, once we spent enough time together. There are three primary characteristics of love: the intimacy, passion, and commitment. And each of these predicts relationship satisfaction in different ways and at different stages of the relationship. So for example, we see that passion, highly passionate relationship seems to be predictive of success at the beginning of a relationship, whereas commitment and intimacy seems to be more predictive of success for a longer lasting relationship once the relationship has been established. Sometimes when we're in part of a relationship, we maybe get distracted by other potential mates. And it's important to keep in mind what's known as comparison level of alternatives. People are going to compare their own relationship to the possibility of having a relationship with another person. It's unreasonable to think that those thoughts don't go through people's heads, but people only act on those possibilities when it makes sense. So if the relationship that you're currently in is ideal, yes, you may see other potential mates, but you're not going to act on those. Only when there's some kind of dissatisfaction in your current relationship will you even consider the possibility of going over to another relationship. In relationships in which there's plenty of satisfaction in them, it's important to then take measures to devalue other plausible or possible mates or relationships other than the one that you're currently in. And oftentimes we do end up staying in relationships maybe longer than we need to. Breaking up is hard to do. It hurts not only the person who's breaking up with the other person, but it especially hurts the person who is getting broken up with. And a lot of times this coincides with physical pain. Emotional pain, social pain does actually physically hurt, similar to physical pain. How do relationships end up getting to the point where a breakup is inevitable or a divorce is inevitable? Well, there are three main signs to look out for. That would be destructive perceptions, destructive beliefs, and destructive behaviors. In terms of destructive perceptions, for example, this would be looking at good things that your significant other does and explaining them away, making them, he's only doing this because he's forced to or because of the situation, and looking at negative things that your significant other does and attributing them to personal qualities. Oh, he's doing these bad things because that's just who he is. Destructive beliefs is when we have not necessarily beliefs about the other person, but beliefs about relationships in general. We might believe that my partner can't change, so it's not worth sticking out this relationship if it's just not working now. We might believe that disagreements are destructive, so we don't necessarily talk things out. Research has found that disclosing information, talking through problems, is the best way to solve them. And sometimes we might see sexual perfectionism rear its ugly head, where people, in one sense, may be expecting perfectionism from the other person, but more likely it's the case where people feel like they're not living up to the standards that the other person has of them, even though those standards don't necessarily exist, and the relationship falls apart as a result. The last destructive behaviors is the part of this that's probably most predictive of relationship dissatisfaction and subsequent breakups or divorces. We can talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. That would be complaining, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. But contempt is the strongest predictor. If you see emotional expressions of contempt or people talking about contempt, typically the end is near for the relationship. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.